Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar tonight, Reimagining the Holidays and Making Memories During a Pandemic. My name is Victoria Bruick, and I am the digital content producer for Pandemic Parenting. And we're so excited to have all of you joining us here tonight. If this is your first time joining us, a little bit about us. We offer these bi-weekly webinars as part of our Pandemic Parenting Exchange series. And each of these webinars, our panelists offer science-based knowledge, experience, and resources to help you and your family cope during the pandemic. To stay up to date on the latest webinars and other resources we have, you can follow us on social media and subscribe to our email list. So I'll be dropping links to all that in the chat in just a few moments. Additionally, we encourage you to tweet along tonight with hashtag pandemic parenting. Any good quotes that stand out to you, things you want to remember. We'd love to engage with you there as well. So with that, I want to introduce our two co-founders of Pandemic Parenting. Dr. Amanda Zelechoski is a clinical and forensic psychologist and an associate professor of psychology at Valparaiso University. Dr. Lindsay Malloy is a developmental and forensic psychologist and an associate professor at Ontario Tech University. You can read more about them and their backgrounds on our website. With that, I'll turn it over to Lindsay.
Thanks, Victoria, and thank you everybody for being here tonight. Really excited to delve into this topic this week. And I just want to say a few words before I introduce our moderator about why we decided to have this conversation, like this particular conversation about the holidays. We know that many of us are going to be celebrating important holidays coming up, different holidays in the next couple of months, and we don't know exactly how those will look yet, I'm sure. But we know that they're going to look different this year than in previous years, as everything else has this year for the most part. And so we wanted to, in kind of thinking about that, and thinking about all of the pressures that are on parents just day to day, right, the everyday burdens that parents are facing right now, and the pressure every year to make the holidays for our kids not just great, but, you know, perfect. So thinking a lot about that, and it got me thinking about, well, what really is important to our kids when it comes to forming, you know, lasting positive memories of things like the holidays. And I do study children's memory, and I publish in this area, but I'm really more focused on the legal or forensic context and that side of things. So I started thinking more about this piece of you know, how our narratives contribute to well-being and how, you know, they help form our identities. And so that brought us to our amazing guest tonight, who I'm really excited. I'm going to introduce our moderator, and then our moderator will introduce our guest expert, Dr. Robyn Fivush. But she is someone whose work I have been following and reading for a long time. And so I'm really excited that she's here tonight, and I'm planning on learning a lot myself. So, but first, every week we have a moderator who is an emerging scholar in the field, and we do that intentionally to kind of highlight these early career folks. And Cortney just reminded me that I'm no longer an early career person in our conversation before this. I'm just kidding. So I'm really excited to introduce you to Dr. Cortney Simmons. Cortney is a postdoctoral researcher in the psychology department at Yale University, and she received her doctorate from the University of California, Irvine, and that is our connection there. So we are both anteaters. That is the actual mascot of UC Irvine, anteaters. So there she specializes in developmental psychology and the law, and her research integrates psychology, criminology, psychobiology, and quantitative modeling to examine how individual and contextual factors contribute to risky behavior during adolescence. She also examines the juvenile justice system as a developmental context, that affects adolescents' educational achievement, well-being, and behavior. So I'm going to turn it over to you now, Cortney.
Thank you for the introduction, and then also thank you for having me here tonight as the moderator. I'm really excited to learn more about what we can do to make the holidays a bit more memorable and positive despite everything that's going on this year. So thank you for having me.
Of course.
So the way that tonight's session is structured is first we'll have a discussion between our wonderful hosts and then also with our guest expert. And then after this discussion, we'll have a bit of time for a Q&A where we can answer all of your burning questions on memory and the holidays. So if there's a question that comes up as we're talking, Feel free to put it in the Q&A box and we'll try to get to it at the end of a session. Hopefully that sounds good. And so now I have the privilege and pleasure of introducing our guest expert, Dr. Robyn Fivush. Dr. Fivush is the Samuel Candler Dobbs Professor of Psychology and the Director of the Institute of Liberal Arts at Emory University, where she's been on faculty since 1984. She's a fellow of both the American Psychological Association and the Association for Psychological Science, so truly an expert in her field. So her research focuses on the social construction of autobiographical memory and the relations among memory, narrative, identity, trauma, and coping. She has published over 150 books, book chapters, and articles on these topics, including her most recent book, Family Narratives and the Development of an Autobiographical Self. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Fivush. And so before we jump into really thinking about memories and the holidays, Dr. Fivush, can you just give us like a brief overview of the development of memory in children? So when do children start thinking or forming long-lasting, long-term memories?
Well, good evening. Thank you, Courtney and Lindsay and Amanda, for inviting me to be a part of this webinar and to share some of the research that my colleagues and my students and I have been doing over the last several decades now. It doesn't seem possible, but that's how long it's been. And Courtney, it's wonderful to meet you because I haven't had a chance to meet you yet. So I'm really glad that you're moderating. Autobiographical memory, more broadly speaking, is really memory of our personal experiences, memories of both specific episodes. So if we're talking about young children, going to the park last Sunday, although I guess we're not doing that as much as we used to. But also, it's not just specific episodes, it's also recurring things like Thanksgiving with my family, or the Christmas holiday, or the Hanukkah holiday. Things that recur over and over, but yet also become an important part of our sense of what we've experienced, and that becomes an important part of our sense of who we are. So our autobiographical memories are really our autobiography. They're our story of who we are, what we've experienced, how we understand them, how we evaluate them, and how we use those memories to predict the future, to direct our behavior, to create our sense of values and beliefs in the world. So that's, in a nutshell, what families are doing when they talk about everyday family stories. It sounds like a lot is going on, and in some ways a lot is going on, yet the stories themselves can be very, very simple. Children begin talking about their past really as soon as they begin talking. 16, 18, 20 months of age, children will begin to refer to their past experiences. But their memories are very fragmented, very sporadic. They can't really hold on to those memories for a very long period of time. One of the things that parents are really doing with their children when they talk about the past with their child is scaffold those memories into a more coherent, organized form, what we call a narrative, a story, right? And as that story emerges, the child begins to be able to understand their experiences in new ways as an organized story of what happened.
Love it. I should have mentioned earlier too that Dr. Fivush has a Psychology Today blog, which is really great. I ended up reading a whole bunch of them before this, and just the way she's able to distill the research into a very digestible form. But it's called The Stories of Our Lives, right? The blog. And
exactly.
So, yeah, exactly. And then there's I don't often think about memory like that as being the stories of our lives, and how it. Anyway, sorry, Courtney, I just jumped in, but.
No worries at all. And I think this kind of lends to like the question that I had next, which is, in one of your 2017 studies, you wrote that ourselves are at least partly defined by our memories. So what did you mean by that?
I think it's fairly well accepted by most researchers in autobiographical memory, as I said earlier, that memories of our personal experiences define a lot of who we are in the present. We are, in some sense, an accumulation of our experiences. Of course, we're other things as well. Our sense of self is our personality traits, our self-concept, but a large part of who we are is our experiences, our narrative identity, the story of our life. That's a very slow developing autobiographical narrative. very young kids, preschoolers, start to begin to be able to tell simple stories like what they did in the park last Sunday or the birthday party they went to. As children get older, they begin to expand those memories. They link them together. They start to think about how those memories relate both to each other and to an emerging sense of who I am and what it means to be me. And a large part of that has to do with not just the facts of what happened. And I know Lindsay and Amanda, as forensic psychologists, really focus on accuracy. And that's a critically important question about memory. But my focus is not so much on accuracy as meaning making. How do we make sense of our experiences? What do they mean for us and our sense of who we are? So when I remember the fight I had with my sister, yes, there's going to be the aspects of what actually happened, but there's also how did I interpret it? How did I interpret her motivations? How do I understand my emotions? How do I regulate that relationship through the way I remember that event?
Nice. Well, one thing that I keep thinking about is like, how do parents contribute to it? Parents contribute to the environments and the experiences that children have.
Yeah.
Now, how do parents kind of shape those memories? Is there a way that they do that, or is it all on the child?
Oh no, it's absolutely as you know,
Yeah,
Cortney,
thank God.
it's a very, very complex developmental process. I mean, it is, of course, there's the individual child but the individual child is always embedded in a social and cultural system, right? So, there's no easy answer to that. It's not nature or nurture, it's always both and. But parents play a really important role in how children form their memories. As I said, when children first start talking about the past, parents really are part of the process of structuring those stories with them. So what we discovered actually several decades ago now is that there are individual differences in how parents engage in the reminiscing process, how we talk about our past experiences together, and they vary along a dimension of elaboration. So some parents are more elaborative. And what that means is that they talk more frequently about past experiences. They talk in more detail, both about what happened in the world, but also in particular about the internal landscape of the mind, what the child was thinking and feeling, what other people were thinking and feeling, and making a richer, more textured memory of what happened. And other parents are just less elaborative. They tend to ask very factual, simple questions, yes, no questions. They don't elicit as much from the child. And what we've found over many studies now, many longitudinal studies, both from my lab and also from many other people's labs, including labs around the world in multiple cultures, that parents who are more elaborative have children who come to recall their own past experiences in more coherent and detailed ways. And that's important because children who have more coherent and detailed memories of their own past experiences also show better outcomes, both in terms of academics, in terms of literacy. I mean, you can kind of make some sense out of that. I learned to tell a good story. That's part of the literacy environment. But they also do better in terms of emotional understanding and emotion regulation. And the reasoning behind that and the findings that support that is that parents who are more elaborative, as I said, talk a little bit more about emotions and feelings, thoughts, and help the child understand those emotional experiences in ways that help the child really regulate their emotions, so that these children really do become more emotionally regulated as they get older. Importantly, it's also the case that it's very easy to become an elaborative parent. So there is, kind of naturally, spontaneously occurring differences, but several studies, many studies now, have done some intervention work where just talking with parents about being more elaborative, explaining what an elaborative style is, and helping the parent become a little bit more elaborative. Parents do this very, very easily. And when they do, when these intervention studies show the same kind of positive outcome for the child as the naturally occurring differences. So that's I think that's encouraging for all the parents out there. Be elaborative. It's really easy. Ask more open-ended questions. Follow in when your child remembers a piece of information. So if you're saying like, do you remember what we did at the park? And the child says swings. It's like, oh yeah, tell me more about the swings. Did we swing real high? Really follow in on your child. Really elaborate. How did that make you feel? Were you sad? What is, how, what made you sad? How could we make you feel less sad?
Mm-hmm. I found in conversations like that too, that it can be so healing for the parent also. And I think that's what some of these studies, you're referencing. I think there's a colleague of mine at Notre Dame, Krista Valentino, who did one with maltreating parents and children, right? And the elaborative conversations you're describing was healing for both the parent and the child. And it, as I'm sure we're going to talk about this later, I think it's been on Lindsay's and my mind a lot, like the sort of mom guilt around perfect holidays. But so, I found in some of these conversations like you're describing, it's helping me understand what my child took out of that, and where I might be feeling really guilty because this situation didn't go the way I want, or this event didn't happen the way I thought it should have. When I start to ask some of these questions in the way you're describing, it's like, oh, they have a totally different take on this. And what I was feeling bad about isn't even something they're, upset about. So I love that you're talking about this in a way that like we can learn to do this and practice.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought up Kristen Valentino's work, because she's really done an amazing amount of work on some of these intervention studies, and really has shown in such positive ways that it's not only relatively easy to help parents do this in more elaborative ways, but all the positive outcomes that comes from this. Mm-hmm. I also want to point out that a lot of this early work was done with preschoolers and the very early emergence of the ability to narrate our past and understand our past experiences from a particular perspective. But this continues to be important as children get older, with middle childhood, and it becomes particularly important again in adolescence. And I know that a lot of you work with that, Amanda and Cortney, you work with adolescents as well. Adolescence is, a turbulent time in development, but it's a period of time when adolescents begin to really think about who they are. They really begin to question, who am I in the world? What Erickson called the identity crisis. Mm-hmm. Whether it's a crisis or just a questioning, but it's a challenging time. And this is also when adolescents begin to really connect their past experiences together into a really coherent, full autobiographical story of self. And the way that parents talk with their adolescents is also critically important in terms of helping them build this fuller autobiography. But Amanda, what you were saying is really even magnified more with adolescents. The benefits for parents of sharing their own stories of their own adolescence and childhood with their adolescents is really, has also been shown to be quite positive. So some of the work that Kate McLean out at Western Washington has done has really shown. I love
her work, yeah.
Yes, she's great. But that work has really shown that, the benefits of this storytelling between parent and child. And I do hope we get to talk about full families as well. But the storytelling between parent and child really benefits the kids, but it also really benefits the parents.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's a two-way street for sure. So now I kind of want to shift it now to the holidays, is what we're here to talk about. So we know major holidays are coming up, and parents, everyone is concerned about what the holidays are going to look like and how they might compare to previous years when we weren't in the middle of a pandemic. So what is actually important for kids to form like positive, long-lasting memories in the holidays? What are the key factors that lead to memory formation?
Well, I think that, to shift that question a little bit, it's what makes storytelling so powerful in the family environment. So I want to shift a little bit. We've been talking about how parents help children form memories from early in development, how it's important in the preschool years, is important in adolescence. But I want to expand this a little bit and talk a little bit about family storytelling in a larger context. Because families tell lots and lots of stories, right? We don't just tell stories about our own experiences. We tell stories about other people's experiences too. So early in development, a lot of the focus is on helping a child understand her or his personal experiences. But as children get older, they enter larger worlds. They enter worlds where parents start talking about things that happened at work or things that happened when they were kids. So family stories become models, ways of understanding the world for young children, and particularly for adolescents. And it's not just the stories that parents tell, but the stories that grandparents tell, and aunts and uncles and cousins and siblings. That these are ways, these are entries into ways of seeing the world and understanding the world and vicariously experiencing the world that helps children, adolescents, and young adults really experience the world in different ways, understand what values and ideals they want to adopt, what, how they're connected across the generations and across time, that my sense of identity is not just who I am, but part of the family that I come from. And where this becomes important, particularly around the holidays, is that this really is a sense of belonging and a sense of continuity. I think one of the things we're facing in the pandemic that's so challenging is this sense of how will we get past this? How will this ever be over? How will we get through this? One of the things that family stories do for all of us, kids and adults, is it provides us with models of ways of resilience through difficult and challenging times. So when we hear about the hard times that our grandparents went through, maybe, for me, it would be World War II. For you, it might be 9/11, right? Every generation, every cohort has stories that they know from their parents, from their grandparents, that roots them in a history and roots them in a sense of perseverance and resilience. So I think one of the really important things about family storytelling this holiday season is to tell stories about the family celebrating holidays together in the past, to tell stories about the family having fun together, to tell stories about the family being strong and withstanding challenges. Those are the kinds of stories, even if it doesn't lead to the memory of this particular holiday, will lead to resilience and hope for the future.
Yeah, what a great opportunity. I know we're going to get to, I think, a little bit later, maybe just talking about ways to connect, but I just love that suggestion of really immerse yourself and lean into the family stories. What a great time to be talking about some of those things when we maybe don't have the same ways we gather or distractions that we're, I'm picturing our family's Christmas usually, which is tons of little kids opening presents and nobody can get a word in and it's just chaos, right? But like what you're talking about, these opportunities to get on Zoom with your grandparents and have them tell you a story about their favorite holiday tradition or a time that they remember their holiday celebration looking really different than it usually did. What a beautiful opportunity to sort of slow down and lean into some of those opportunities.
I also think, I agree completely. I also think it's important to stress that not every story has to be a big deal. Not every family story is, let's sit down and I'm going to tell you the story. You're going to listen closely, because all parents know. It's like, no, that's not what the kids are going to do, right? They're going to roll their eyes. They're going to go on. But the snippet, even the snippets and the touchstones, the small stories that we share almost in passing, like as we're baking cookies, right? Or making pecan pie for Thanksgiving. Say, I used to make pecan pie with my mother. And kind of let it lay. The story may emerge later. It may become an important story later. Sometimes you just need markers that kind of lay the groundwork.
My kids are just getting to the age where they even realize that I'm an actual person that has, a history and a life before they were born. And when I say things about, my mom or my dad or my grandparents, they're like, oh, that's weird. Like she acts like she had some sort of life before us. That's so strange. But I do think it's important for them to our family seems to have this, like, we tell the same stories every
Mm-hmm.
single holiday. It's like, you know, the grandpa telling his war stories like for the 800th time, and it's just become like part of the tradition. And you know, but when they're not there, it's difficult, right?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of aspects to that. One is the stories themselves are important in creating models of relationships, models of perseverance, models of resilience, models of facing challenges. But the telling of the story is also important, because the telling of the story, and that's, I think, why families love to tell the same stories over and over and over. And we see this in our research. The telling of the story almost becomes a way of rebonding as a family and creating those emotional connections. And it's really, I always find it amusing, and we see this a lot actually, because we record a lot of family stories where the adolescent will start correcting the parents, like, no, that's not the way you told it last time. You know, it's like the story has to be told this way.
Process, yeah. I also am really struck by the lovely stories you guys are giving as examples. This does not sound like the stories at my family holidays where we're making fun of the stupid things we did as kids. So these are much lovelier examples of kind stories and war stories, and yes.
But even the stupid things you did as kids are important stories. You know?
Oh yeah. Yeah, my kids love them now. Tell us about the time that our mom did this. Tell us about the time that Uncle so-and-so did that. Right. Exactly.
Yeah, about the time that someone caught the Christmas tree on fire. That's a great story. That happened in my family.
That would be a great story. I want to hear that story.
Yeah, I would actually like you to record that for all of our children, Cortney, please.
You can post it online after, I'll tell you. So some of these things, I just keep thinking about the traditions and the stories that we tell year after year, and the different traditions that we have year after year. Is there something that we can do to kind of like keep those traditions alive? Or should we, as we're like in the middle of this pandemic and our families are often separated, should we find ways of making new traditions? What do you think would be most important during this time?
I actually think that these kinds of challenging times, we take comfort in the old traditions, that we want to harken back to if we have good times as children, you know, that hopefully most of us do, right? That we want that sense of security and that things will be that way again. Having said that, I don't think it's a bad idea every family develops new traditions, right? Every whether it's, you know, whether it's a biological family or a friend family, or, you know, you develop new traditions as you move along. And so I don't think you need to deliberately make a decision to do one or the other, but I do think that going back to there is something comforting about the stories we all know and are telling again. And I also think, because, Amanda, as you're saying, this Christmas is going to be a little bit different. There's not going to be a ton of little kids, you know, cousins and what have you, opening presents under the tree. Maybe it is a time to be a little bit more deliberate about creating spaces online to share some stories. And to be a little bit more deliberate about that.
I was also thinking about some of the traditions, like you're saying, do they have to be completely new? Do we have to just cast away the other ones? And, you know, I saw a friend post these pictures a couple of days ago, which maybe Victoria can share, of her kids going to see Santa. And I remember being really struck by, you know, how is this going to work? And when I saw these pictures, which you can see, I don't know if you're able to see, but Santa has a face shield, and there's plexiglass between where my friend Jill's kiddos are looking at Santa and talking to him. And, you know, I became really sort of sad when I first saw these, like, oh my gosh, it's so different. And, you know, and then you look at the kids and you look at Santa, and they're so joyful and they're so happy to be there. And Santa has this big grin, and they're fine. And they're still doing their tradition of going to see Santa. And it was like, oh, what am I so sad about? You know, like, look at how lovely it is that they could still have this tradition. So I appreciate what you're saying, Robyn, about, you know, maybe we're holding on to some of those old ones, or maybe they need to look a little different, or maybe we're just creating some new ones this year to make some of those new stories. So.
And that maybe we as the parents are the ones that have these real scripts of this is exactly how it's supposed to go. And our kids, especially the younger ones, might be a little bit more flexible in terms of what they think is, is reasonable. And I mean, as long as mine at the ages they are get to, ask for their pile of plastic stuff, like they're going to be fine. But anyway, I know when I was looking through your blogs, Robyn, I saw you had sort of instructions on how to do a family story circle. Do you mind talking to people a little bit about that and how they might be able to implement? Because it seemed like something you could really do with these Zoom types of holidays we might be having this year.
Absolutely. So story circles, or whether it's families or friends, or I actually use these in my classrooms as well. Story circles are really wonderful ways of creating connections among people who didn't know each other before and strengthening connections among people who know each other very, very well. Because we don't always know all of the stories about even the people we love the most. Story circles are really exactly what they sound like. It's kind of, when you do them in person, you sit in a circle. Usually, you want at least 4 and no more than 10 people. And you come and you decide on a story prompt. So for example, it might be, what's your favorite Thanksgiving memory from your childhood? And each person goes around the circle and they get 2 or 3 minutes to tell their story, and there's no interruptions and no questions and no distractions, and you just go around the circle and everybody tells the story. If you can't think of one, you can pass, but it's going to come back to you. And then you just, after everybody gets a chance to tell their story, then you kind of say, wow, these were the common themes. This was so interesting. That's where you start to have the discussion. And what you see in story circles is the common threads and the common elements and the meaningful connections that we make to each other. I think intergenerational story circles are really an interesting direction for these holidays, to really have, grandparents, parents, if you have adolescents, you can't do this with really little kids. You probably can't do it with your kids, Lindsay. Right. And the connections that, of the personal themes when somebody who's a grandparent is telling a story that connects to something that their grandchild who's an adolescent says, I didn't know that about you. I didn't understand that about you. And there's ways in which, as you were saying, Lindsay, you start to see people as people, not just as your grandmother, your old lady grandmother, or, your strict father, or, you start to see them as people. And they're really quite, they're fun, and they're very empowering.
Awesome. Yeah, and it definitely seems like something we could make happen this year. And I know when I was looking at it, I saw the do you know questions that you had come up with in one of your publications, which I think Victoria has a slide on that too, but we can definitely pop those in our resources that we post after when we post this recording. But when I was looking at those, I was thinking, wow, there's a lot of this stuff I don't know about my parents and about my grandparents, and could lead to some very interesting conversations for sure.
One of the things that we found, and it's now been replicated by multiple other people, and it's just now been replicated cross-culturally in a study that is just being published, that adolescents who know more of their family history, who know more stories about such as this, like how your parents met, where your mother grew up, who tell more elaborated stories about their family history and who know more of these stories actually show higher levels of well-being. They show a higher sense of meaning and purpose in life. They show higher levels of autonomy. They show higher self-esteem. So there's something very powerful about being anchored in a family history. And the only way you know a family history is if you're part of family storytelling, right? The only way you would know where some of your grandparents met is if you've been told stories about that, right? There had to have been that time when that information was passed down to you via stories.
Yeah, and when I think about kids different ages too with this, one of the things I've noticed, like my kids sometimes really enjoy hearing stories about when that person was their age. So when you were 10, what were you into? Or when you were, so I know as people are sort of like, well, can I really get my younger kid to listen to this, or my adult, my teenager? It's like, then relate it to their stage of life, and they're all ears.
Yeah, Amanda, that's a great point. And in fact, what we find is that those developmentally matched stories are the ones that are the most meaningful. So, if you're 12 or 14 or 21, the stories that are the most meaningful to you about your parents were when they were that age. And those are the stories that provide the most identity connections for you. But the other side of that, I want to go back to the how good this is for parents, by the way. The other side of that is we also have to developmentally match our stories to our children. That is, there are certain stories you're just not going to tell a 6-year-old, but you might tell a 16-year-old. Well, you might not, but you might tell your adult child, right? So, it's not like we just want to just tell every kid everything. You do want to think about, the stories that you're telling, particularly if they're difficult, challenging stories. But there's also a lot of work that comes that shows the positive effects for middle age and older adults of telling these stories and passing them on to the younger generations. The positive benefits of feeling generative, feeling like you're leaving a legacy, having also, again, higher self-esteem, higher sense of family connections and positive relationships. So the stories work in all ways to bond us together. It works across the ages and across the generations.
That's so important to think about right now, because I know that in our conversations leading up to this, we keep thinking about the kids, and I think that's partly because that's where Amanda and I are right now in life. But I mean, really thinking a lot about the grandparents too. And I think with the holidays coming up, it could be a really lovely time for a lot of people who are on their own, and a lot of grandparents. So hopefully,
and thinking about yourselves, the stories are good for you too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we learned that in a different webinar that I was supposed to do that, right? Remember? Good point. Thank you. It's all coming full circle again.
Well, I kind of want to take it in a little bit of a different direction, because we're talking about adolescence and tweens and whatnot. And we know that one thing that everyone talks about is technology and social media. And I know during this period, everyone's posting photos of their perfect garland, their perfect trees, the presents that they're getting. But this could really lend to social comparison, and it might get people down. So what do you think about that topic? And then also, how can we make our holidays, our memories really authentic without social media getting in the way?
So this is getting a little bit outside my area of expertise per se. So what I will say about that is that to the first part of your question, in terms of the social comparison, I do think there's some evidence for that, obviously. There is mixed evidence on the positive versus negative benefits of being on social media for adolescents. And I know there's some aspects of being on social media have some positive effects. A lot of aspects have some negative effects. but I don't know the extent to which sharing objects on social media is not sharing a story. I think that when social media allows us to share more of a story about ourselves, it might have a different effect than just sharing pictures. But I don't know. I think social media creates a lot of problems in a lot of ways. As much as it keeps us connected, it creates a lot of problems. In terms of authentic memories, I'm not sure I would actually agree with you. I think that, having photographs, having videos, having stories, what makes a memory more authentic than any other? I mean, I think because my focus is really on how we make meaning and how we make sense of our memories. I don't think it's as important that it be accurate to what really happened as much as it's a story that brings us together and that we can bond over. We can laugh over it. We can cry over it. So I think that the notion of authenticity implies that some memories might be more accurate than others, which is certainly true, but I don't think that necessarily makes them more identity meaningful. Mm-hmm. I think that another sense of authenticity is, are they true to who I am? Do they resonate with my sense of who I am? Do they help me understand myself? Do they help me understand my family? Do they bring me closer together with other people? So I think it depends how you mean authentic.
Yeah.
Sometimes I look at the pictures of our events that we've, our life events, and my husband and I will just laugh about it because we're like, look at this picture. We look so happy here. This was a terrible day. Like, the kids were awful and it was miserable. But if you look at this picture, we look so happy.
Yes.
It's funny.
It's so true.
I also think, there's going to be a time when we're going to be looking back on this, and it's going to be remember that Thanksgiving during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And it will be one of many, many Thanksgivings. And mm-hmm. there's going to be lots of Thanksgiving stories and lots of Thanksgiving routines and lots of Thanksgiving traditions and lots of Thanksgiving stories. And this is going to be one story among many.
Yeah.
And, you want it to be more positive than negative, obviously, right? But no holiday is going to be perfect. But over the course of a life, we have memories of a lifetime, and mm-hmm. a single memory isn't really going to be what's important. What's going to be important is that whole cache of memories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that the authenticity part, I've been mindful of not telling the kids in their Halloween costumes, take off your mask. It's that's part of the story. I don't mind all that stuff being in there, which is our real life right now. And so I think there is a part of, as you're talking about, Robyn, when we look back on these holidays, that's going to be a part of our story. Remember when we had that Thanksgiving where we had this or that, or, so, mm-hmm. So yeah, thinking about it's not just the social media piece, but how you're capturing what the stories are for your family right now, and what they are and how real they were is going to be a part of your family's narrative.
Yeah, I don't think we want to necessarily airbrush it.
Right. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a great way to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great term.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hate to cut this off, but we're heading into the last 15 minutes of the session. So I want to get to some of the audience's questions. So the first question I think is a great question, and this comes from both Carolyn from Virginia and then also Catherine from Ohio. And they both want to know, how do we incorporate family from a distance that is more than just Zoom? Is there anything else that we can be doing?
I do think that there are other ways of doing it. I mean, we can have, this sounds old-fashioned, but written stories and scrapbooks and sharing of photos and stories. It can be done the non-technology way. For those of us who remember life when there were actually letters and not just emails. I do think that, making family scrapbooks, physical scrapbooks, as well as doing it, on the computer, are ways of connecting. It doesn't have to be on Zoom.
Yeah. Yeah. And connecting with technology that they're used to. So when I think back to the adolescence we were talking about, it's like, even ways of telling stories through memes, like, hey, you and grandma are going to text each other a meme every day about how your day went. And it's like this hilarious way for them to, and have to teach grandma what a meme is,
Yeah.
So just, I think there's so many ways to kind of meet them where they are, and let's just connect. That's what's underneath this, is finding ways to connect, I think.
Yeah, I used to do something with my grandma, and I were both into scrapbooking, and I used to do something where we had this little mini scrapbook, and I would mail it to her, and she would do a couple pages, and then she would mail it back to me, and I would do a couple pages, and that went on for a couple of years. So, I mean, there's lots and lots of ways. We have some links we can post in the resources too, where we found some just sort of lists of ideas people have come up with, really brilliant things for connecting kids and grandparents and just everyone.
There are a lot of great resources on the web around how to tell family stories, how to document family stories that have to do both with being online, but also being, using other ways of doing it. There are really great resources.
And then Robyn in the chat had a great idea of making paper snowflakes and then hanging them around the house and then sending them to family. I think that's wonderful. I love making paper snowflakes. It's my favorite holiday thing to do. So
that is a great idea.
Yeah. So the next question comes from Aaron from Ohio. And Aaron wants to know, are there any suggestions with balancing the pressures and traditions from grandparents with wanting to simplify?
I do think that you can simplify and just choose one or two things that are very meaningful and not worry. This is now going back to Christmas rather than Thanksgiving, or maybe it's, you do this, but, maybe you don't put up the tree and the Christmas lights and bring out all the little decorative elves. And you say, you know what, this year we're just going to do the tree. And that's just going to be our special tradition this year. So we'll keep one of our traditions. We don't necessarily have to do everything. I think the same with Thanksgiving. You can simplify the meal. You can simplify whatever rituals you have around that. And I do think that even coming together as a family and making a decision about, well, if we are going to simplify, what is the most important tradition? What's most important to you and why? And now you have more stories, and I think that would be a nice way to kind of figure out what's most important to the family.
Yeah, and some of those pressures too, I'm wondering if Erin was also, like, we've heard from a lot of parents talking, asking us about, well, what if someone in my family think we should be doing the holiday this way or getting together, and others in our family don't feel safe to do that? And so how do we reconcile these things? And one of the best ways, I think, to do that is to really plan ahead, which is sort of counterintuitive in this time of all this uncertainty and rates are rising and we don't know what that's going to mean. But don't wait to make your plans. You have to kind of use the information you have now and just sort of plan accordingly, because when you don't have a plan, that can just sort of increase the tension and anxiety for everyone. So, in my family, for example, I have 3 siblings, and it's sort of become a joke now that we know how badly our parents want to see the kids, but of course we don't feel safe doing a big family gathering. So, my siblings and I got together and made the custody arrangement for our parents. And we were like, okay, you're taking Thanksgiving. How's this going to work in a safe way to see them? Okay, you're taking Christmas Eve, but it was like having a plan made sense to just help everybody get on the same page, rather than, well, what are these pressures going to look like? And they really want to know, are we coming? Aren't we coming? How's this going to happen? So I think just kind of getting people on the same page and talking about how it's going to work in advance, even if that has to change, also helps our kids have less anxiety about it.
I'm thinking too about responses that you'll have in your back pocket for when people challenge, what you might want to do or what you feel is safe for your family. So I think for me, getting caught off guard with that sort of stuff is really difficult. So if I have this is my go-to phrase that I'm going to say, well, this is the best decision for our family, or this is what we feel safe doing, can really help in those moments of conflict, I think. Yeah, I mean, one thing you can do is move to Canada and the borders are closed and every one of your family members is somewhere else. And so you don't even have the option. And that makes things really simple in a sort of terrible way. But yeah, I think we're going to go all out in the opposite way, where we're going to do tons of decorations and like one of those blow up things in the front yard and just go nuts with it, because we're, you know, and I think too, just thinking about, well, I know it's hard, and I'm not trying to do a toxic positivity thing right now, but to sort of think about what are maybe some of the silver linings here. And for me personally, it's like, this will be the first holidays in 18 years that I will wake up in my own bed on Christmas morning, like, because my husband's family's in the UK. I've traveled like every single holiday season for 18 years. And there will be something kind of nice about not having to do that. So trying to focus on what some of the positive things might be for people.
I agree with that, but I also think it's important to acknowledge the loss, and that, and that's okay too. I mean, this isn't maybe the holiday season we want it to be, but that doesn't mean it's completely awful, right? So it's like, yes, it's really sad that we can't be with grandma and grandpa. So what can we do among ourselves, or what can we do to connect with them? Also to bring the kids into that decision making, like how do you want to connect with other members of the family which you can't connect with in person? You know, we might have some good ideas. And it's really honoring the grief, but I love what you just said about sort of empowering the kids and bringing them into that, and sort of leaving them with a bit of hope. Like maybe you can even say, hey, let's make a list of all the things we're going to do with grandma and grandpa when the next time we get to see them, or next Christmas that we didn't get to. So it's sort of honoring what you're grieving, but also this hope around like, we're going to get to do this with them next time.
And what ideas do you have for connecting with them now? Because I think they can surprise us sometimes with what sort of, you know, we are like, well, I have to figure out all of these ways to make it perfect, but we can also ask them what their ideas are and what they might want to do.
Kind of related to this, but Susan in the chat had a question about how we can overcome the challenges of divorced families. So
Susan, not to punt that, and I want to hear what Robyn has to say, but our webinar in 2 weeks is the single parenting and co-parenting edition of Pandemic Parenting. So we are zooming right in on divorced families, separated families, and single parents. So I hope that we're going to get to.
I feel like Amanda planted that question. She planted that question to like promote the next webinar.
I didn't, but. Yeah, but I don't know if Robyn had thoughts on that for this.
I do. I mean, and only in the sense that, I mean, not all stories are positive, right? There are negative stories, and we need to acknowledge and validate that there is sadness in life, and there is loss, and there is grief. And we need to acknowledge those stories as well. At the same time, creating stories of good times and positive things to balance that. I do think that, you know, we need, and the research absolutely shows this, we need to acknowledge the loss that this is for kids as well, whether it's because their parents aren't together, or because they're not getting to see their grandparents, or because they're not getting the kind of holiday that they want. These are losses. And it is okay sometimes to say, I get it. This is hard, but we'll get through it. We'll figure it out.
Shifting back to the parents a little bit, how can parents take some of the pressure off of themselves that they put on to just make the holidays perfect for kids? And I think this is a great question that was submitted by Stephanie from Guatemala. So how do we do that? You know, how do you take pressure off yourself to be the perfect parent? I think
we're listening, Robyn. Tell us, please. We're listening.
I really think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is What we remember tends to be kind of the general scripts with some specific episodes, right? You don't remember every detail of every Thanksgiving of your childhood. You don't. What do you think about what you remember about Thanksgivings of your childhood? And there's kind of the general sense that it was wonderful to be with family. Hopefully, that's the memory, right? Right. You're not going to make it perfect. It's never going to be perfect. But what you want is to create an environment in which there is joy, in which there is sharing, in which there is connection, in which there is empathy. That's what will be remembered. And, they're not going to remember that, a particular temper tantrum, or they didn't get this particular food just think about the way your own memory works. It's more scripted or generic. You don't, not everything has to be perfect.
Yeah, and it's like the fundamentals of what kids need is something we've been talking about for months in these webinars, and it's, to feel safe and loved. And so it just always makes me think of like, what kids want more than toys and games. They want grown-ups who care about them to play those toys and games with, that's what's underneath it. And so, it's not about being perfect, like you said. It's just, it's creating those memories where they're feeling those connections more than anything.
And that I don't know if anyone saw that meme or sort of viral post, I think from last year, that was a teacher saying, what the kids come back with after the winter break, they come back in the new year. They don't talk about, the presents that they got, or, they talk about like the movie that they went to, or like the hot chocolate that they had with their grandparents. And so to think, the experiences over the stuff, that post just really resonated with me.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to cut this short. We have so many great questions that were submitted by the audience, and I wish we could get to all of them, but I want to end on one final question. And this is, what is one piece of advice that you would give to someone when it comes to reimagining the holidays this year?
Relax. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to be, there is loss, there is grief, it's not going to be necessarily what we want it to be, but that doesn't mean it won't be good. And it doesn't mean we can't create connections. And it doesn't mean that we can't bond with our family and celebrate what we do have.
A perfect way to end.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robyn. So unfortunately, we are at that time. Gosh, I wish we had 2 more hours to keep talking about this. I learned so much tonight. Thank you so much, Dr. Robyn Fivush, for joining us. We're so grateful for you to so generously give of your time and your wisdom to us tonight.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thank you for doing this. This is fantastic.
Especially late at night.
Doing this.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
It's really, as I said earlier, I don't know where you find the time, with your, with everything else that you're doing. It's fantastic that you're doing this.
Thank you so much.
My kids are basically, they're basically wild now. So that's where I'm just kidding.
So just relax. It's not going to be perfect, Lindsay.
That's right. Advice. Oh, I love it.
Oh, they are far from perfect.
It's our holiday mantra. Yeah, is the relax. So thank you everybody for joining us. We hope that this was helpful as we're entering the holiday season. Please let us know what you thought. Victoria has popped our feedback survey link in the chat. Please take just a couple minutes to give us your thoughts. Let us know what other topics you want us to be tackling. Again, a huge thank you to Dr. Robyn Fivush. Please follow her blog, The Stories of Our Lives. Victoria had posted that in the chat, and we'll certainly post it in our resources on the website. Thank you also to Dr. Cortney Simmons for her fantastic moderation this evening. We're so grateful that you were with us and spearheaded a wonderful conversation. So thank you for being here, Cortney. Thanks to all of our team as well at Pandemic Parenting and for all the support that they provide us. And so with that, one of the best ways that you can help us keep doing this work is to share the website, share the free resources with others. That's why we do them. We want to be helping parents and caregivers and people who work with kids. So please keep spreading the word and letting people know that these resources are there for them, and let us know what other topics we can be addressing to continue supporting you in the coming months. And again, you can always support us by making a contribution or having your organization partner with us to sponsor any of these webinars. Lindsay and I donate all of our time, but we need to take care of our fantastic team. So we appreciate any support that you can offer. You can find links to our previous webinars and resources at pandemic-parent.org. We always post the recordings and all of the accompanying resources, as well as following us on our various social media channels, where we like to share lots of new tidbits that come up in between the webinars. Please join us, as Susan segued beautifully for us, for our next webinar, which is called Pandemic Parenting, the Co-Parenting and Single Parenting Edition. And it is on Tuesday, November 24th. So please join us then. And in the meantime, please take good care of yourselves, and we will see you again soon.